Welcome everybody to geohug, and I'm so excited for today's one. I'm thrilled that we have Lucy Potter joining us today. So Lucy is a seasoned mining executive with deep expertise in exploration, mineral resource estimation, and technical risk management. And as general manager of technical at Rio Tinto, she leads risk oversight across a diverse global asset portfolio. And she co-won the 2025 AusIMM Parker Challenge for innovation in resource estimation and founded Etana. Is it Etana?
Itana. Yep. You got it.
Etana Mining Mentors, a consultancy focused on building capability in emerging mining companies. And it is going to be brilliant hearing all about it from her today as she takes us through the Parker Challenge 2025, the building blocks for reliable resource estimates. So thank you so much, Lucy, for joining. It's awesome having you here today.
Thank you, Jess. And look, I was on GeoHug 3 years ago, and I just love to see that your enthusiasm has not waned and you've continued to have a stream of amazing presenters. So I'm really happy to be back.
Oh, it's awesome having you back. I loved it when you were on last time, so I'm very excited that you're here again. Before we do get stuck into your presentation, I was really curious what got you into geology to begin with.
So here's where the story has changed in the last month. For 20 years, I've been telling people that when I was applying for my university programs, I didn't know what to choose. It was like biology, chemistry, math, and that my dad told me he had taken a geology course in college and said, oh, that could be good. So that's what I've told people, the story I've told people. But about 3 weeks ago, my mom said to me, oh, I remember sitting with you, Lucy, struggling about your uni applications. And we went down the list and we picked geology because we knew it was a multidisciplinary program. So now I'm not sure who to believe, mom or dad, but either way, there was a parental influence there.
Wow, there you go. It's that's very cool. I wonder which one it was.
Yeah, got to get the story straight.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. My parents were in there. Somehow I wound up where I am and stuck with
Exactly.
it.
Exactly. That's all that matters. Plus, we all love a good story. So, yeah, just
Yeah.
paint it any way you like. And you have had a really awesome career. I'm really curious what some highlights have been for you so far.
Ooh, I wasn't expecting this one. That's a good question, Jess. I think so many, getting to work with amazing people. When I was able to build a team of, since we're on the theme of resource estimation, build a team of resource experts in a previous role. Early days in the bush doing field work and logging core, there's something super romantic about that I loved. And then I think, starting my own business a few years ago was a big scary move for me, leaving my corporate role that I had at the time. I'm super proud of what I did there. I found out I was more courageous than I thought before. And then moving into the role I have now at Rio was another scary jump because I'm not just doing geology. I'm really like learning a lot more about different fields like process safety and tailings and dams. So yeah, I think highlights have been diversity and just different experiences and different people I've worked with.
Yeah, 100%. It's awesome to see like what a mix you've had and how you've pivoted throughout the time. It's really cool to watch. I was also wondering, we love pet rocks here on GeoHug, and I'm curious what you have brought along for us today.
Yes. So first off, I am not a rock geologist. It might not be the safest audience to say that to because there's some pretty amazing geos online, but I do have a rock with a story. It's not a bad one. So this is a small piece of a giant spodumene crystal. So I don't know if you can see it sort of glimmering there. I picked this up 3 years ago. I was invited by Francis McDonald, who's also a past GeoHug presenter. He works at Lift Power. It's a lithium exploration company. And I was invited by Francis to go up to his project in the Northwest Territories. And it was the first time in a long time where I had flown in a helicopter and was dropped down on an outcrop in the middle of nowhere with some incredible field geologists, super experienced. And I learned a ton that day. It was my first time, seeing spodumene of this scale, and it was just like a very refreshing experience and a harken back to my old days of being a field geo. So I keep that one close by to remind me of my roots.
I love that. That's the best story. Oh, how good. I always love it when you come on. It's just could listen to you all day long. I'm very excited to hear from you today. So thank you so much again. If you want to share your screen and we'll get stuck into it.
Parker Challenge 2025. So I am giving part one of a two-part presentation. So my teammate, Guy Desharnais, will be on GeoHug in 1 week's time, and he'll give the second part. So I know he's listening in on me now, making sure I don't say anything wrong, and I'll be checking on him next week. So my talk will be sort of three parts today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Parker Challenge and what it is. I'm going to talk about just a small snippet on the geology, so the geological setting for the data set that we had access to for Parker Challenge. And then I'll talk about our workflow, how we went about it, and a little bit at the end of why we think we might have won. And as I mentioned in the teaser earlier today, I've got some questions for the audience because I'll want to deflect tough questions and hopefully stimulate some conversation to other people. So I'll start with, here we go. I'll start with some recognition to a number of people. So the first one goes to the AusIMM. So for the AusIMM committee, for recognizing what we know is an industry-wide problem, there's no single, company that faces this alone, is variability in resource estimates. It's a challenge for big, small consulting companies, everyone faces it. So for tackling that head on and finding a creative way to address it. Thank you to Barrick, obviously, who provided the data set for the 2025 challenge. They provided judges and a lot of insights on the geology, and obviously the prize was awarded by Barrick. To Sequent, because they provided free software to anyone who wanted to join in on the challenge, but perhaps didn't have their own access to software. So they got free licenses for a couple of months. To my employer, Rio Tinto. So, and Guy's employer, he works for OR Royalties, which is a global gold royalty and streaming company, for employing us. We didn't do this work on our work time. It was kind of a fun weekend activity for us, but obviously getting to work for these great companies is a huge benefit to us. And last but not least is these two cool teenagers at the top here. So Alice and Estelle, 19 and 17 years old, who, thank goodness, are willing to listen to more about geology and block models and resource classification than any teenager should have to. We take them along on geo-related vacations. This one's in Japan, so I don't think they can complain too much about that trip, but really appreciate their support. Okay, so in my talk, I have a couple of quotes from people in the industry that I really respect. The first one here is from Roussos Dimitrakopoulos. So Roussos is a professor at McGill, and he leads the stochastic mine planning laboratory at McGill. And he said, that uncertainty is not a bad thing. It actually can create opportunities. So what Roussos and his students do is they look at ways of coming up with probabilistic or stochastic approaches to mine planning. So just in this snapshot here, you can sort of see what the traditional workflow is. We have a single Krieged or inverse distance estimated model. We get a single value. Each block has one number, one resource classification, and then our mining engineer partners create a single mine plan from it. Now, we know that that single unique model is not the truth. We know that there's uncertainty related to how much data has gone into it, how much uncertainty there is. And yet we sort of take it for cash that that's the model we use to create a plan and to assess value for a resource. And then we get from that model some sort of estimate, we make a plan and we make investments and we go forward, but it's maybe not the optimal plan. So what Roussos does is he relies on a multiple simulation, so perhaps from a conditional simulation model, And he runs 30, 50, 100 or more mine plans. And each one of those mine plans has its own potential outcome in terms of metal, NPV, IRR. And from all those different scenarios, they can choose what is the optimum plan based on that variability. So this is some really amazing work that's happening in Montreal, but I know in other parts of the industry as well. Okay, so now we'll dig into the Parker Challenge. So what is the Parker Challenge? It is an international and innovative competition that was designed by the AusIMM group in Australia to assess variability in mineral resource estimation. So variability from the practitioner and from the approach that the practitioner takes. So the quote from Parker Challenge is, how much variability would there be if multiple geologists or geostatisticians all estimated and classified a mineral resource from the exact same data? So the Parker Challenge wants to find out. It was introduced in 2023 and it was named for the late Harry Parker. And I've chosen this picture of Harry Parker here because, you know, he's not standing next to a variogram. He's not standing next to a Python code. He's really standing next to what he believed was the core or the crux of the problem, which is understanding the geology. And I think, you know, most people on this call will agree that that's where it all starts. And we always have to anchor ourselves on the geological model. So in 2023 was the first Parker Challenge edition. And Rio Tinto was the sponsor for that challenge, and they provided a data set from the OT deposit in Mongolia. Participants knew that that's what the data set was that they were using. And then there was a judging panel from AusIMM, from Rio Tinto, and some other volunteer judges. The winning team was Hot Chili Limited. So it's a 4-person team. And I actually reached out to a couple of them to see if they would make it tonight and provide some of their context. We'll see if they're on. And I really love, they had a report online that talked about why they think they won. And we actually looked at this in our own challenge to say, well, what can we learn from Hot Chili as we are preparing our own entry for 2025? And basically what they said is solid geology was fundamental. So understanding what the OT deposit geology was, being thorough in their documentation all throughout the process, collaborating as a team, getting peer reviews and having people who'd worked in similar geological environments. They used an iterative approach to make sure that they were refining their model as they went. They said going the extra mile. So they actually prepared a table 1 report. And for anyone on here who's prepared a table 1 report, you know that you don't do that for fun. It's a ton of work. And then serendipity. So they had the time in their schedule, their management encouraged them to do it. They had the experience, they had the right mix of, you know, data practitioners, geostatisticians to be able to prepare the model. And I really like this plot that they include here where they show that they pretty much were balanced between spending around a third or a bit more of the third of their time on the geology, a third on the estimation, and then around a third also on validation and reporting. So you can see that they really focused on all of the key elements and didn't just cram in report writing at the very end of the process. So moving forward to 2025, the challenge here was Barrick came in and said, well, and together with AusIMM and said, can we provide an even more complex geological setting and redo the same exercise? And I mean, the OT geologists might challenge that. They might say that their geology is just as complex or more. But anyhow, what the idea was is to say, okay, let's look at how people approach assessing directions of continuity in a really structurally controlled, challenging, complex deposit. And they used a deposit from the Nevada Carlin Gold Trend. So in the case of Barrick, the difference is that they didn't name the deposit. So they called it Enterprise, and they didn't say which deposit in Nevada it was, which provided an added element of intrigue, I think. I spent many hours poring over Google Earth to try and figure out where it was, and it wasn't easy. And if anyone in the chat knows and wants to pop it in there, go for it. All participants received around 2,300 drill holes. There was mapping, there was drone imagery, there was blast hole data. So a really rich data set. However, they did withhold over 800 drill holes that were drilled after 2010, and those were used by the judges to validate the entries, along with the Barrick model to see how close the entries were to the truth, or as a much closer version to the truth as we had. And here's just an image from one of the pits in Nevada showing really some of the complex geological features happening there. So here's our team. Our team number was 469. We were a two-person team, so myself and Guy Desharnais. Guy is the VP for project evaluations at OR Royalties. And you can see he's got many years in exploration, resource estimation, and consulting. And now he's working at OR Royalties. He's been there for 8 years and worked in a number of commodities. For myself, I also worked in exploration, studies, estimation, short stint in consulting, and currently I'm working in major hazard assurance for risks. And these are the different commodities that I've worked in. So here was kind of our guiding light during the competition. The judges provided an assessment rubric. It was very detailed and very clear. They wanted to make sure that the process of judging was fair and transparent and that they were being consistent when evaluating the entries. So we went back to this again and again to make sure we were following the rules. 5 main criteria, so around technical accuracy and rigor. So wanting to have a realistic result coming out, applicability and practicality. So making sure that what was created is something that could be replicated by other people when, we came to the point of sharing our experience, critical thinking and communication, innovation and creativity, and then adherence to guidelines. And we kind of saw that last 10% as kind of a freebie. Like if you get it in on the deadline and you use the file format they requested with the column names they requested, then you sort of almost get a freebie on that 10%. So here's another quote from Mr. Harry Parker himself, who said famously, "In general, an ounce of geology is worth a pound of geostatistics. This may be disappointing to geostatisticians with no geological background. Tough." So we know that geology trumps all, and you can, make a big mess of things if you forget about geology and solely rely on geostatistics. I think this is a really important quote for our domain. Just for fun, I did take the Carlin trend geology description from one of the reports that we were given, popped it into ChatGPT and said, draw me this deposit. And this is what it came up with. And I'm not sure if people can see the detail, but we've got things here like 1 Gepostical Pundis west-southwest, Punges to southwest, west-southwest, Apomi Punging anticlines. So really garbage. And I have two learnings or two takeaways from this image. One is don't worry, geos, your career is safe. I think you can generate good geology better than anything ChatGPT can do. And second learning is, second guess anything that comes out of ChatGPT, because this is quite scary at what it can produce for someone who might not know any better. Okay, so now just turning quickly to Carlin type gold deposits, and I'm no expert here. I did learn a lot, certainly during the Parker Challenge, but I'm not an expert, and I'll refer you to someone who is when I get to the end of this section. So Carlin trend, really spectacular gold camp or gold region in the west central United States. So there's a small inset map here. You can see Great Basin of West United States. Incredible, over 200 kilometers in strike length. I think over 50 kilometers in width. Something like 40 major gold deposits contained over 350 million ounces of gold. And growing, right? So Barrick recently, released news about the 4 Mile deposit, which will be their next mine, and that's got another 7 million ounces of measured, indicated, and inferred resources at grades of like 10 to 12 grams per ton. So really, really incredible deposits, great gold endowment. And something special about Carlin Trend is that I think the deposits were first discovered in around the 1960s, and it changed the way people were exploring for gold because we realized that gold can be very subtle, very discreet. And you'll see in a few rock samples coming up that it's not the most, blatantly chock full of mineralization as you might expect. So it made people realize you can find economic gold deposits where it's not necessarily visible in the rocks. So here's a great, very simple cartoony image from Visual Capitalist. I always love their content. They do a good job of simplifying things. And very simply put, Carlin Trend deposits have 5 essential building blocks. So the first one is about the structures. You need to have really large, deep-seated structures that are open for a significant amount of time to allow a lot of hydrothermal fluids to flow through that will deposit the gold. You need to have a solid amount of permeability in the rock so that those fluids can really permeate long distances to deposit. The host rocks need to be such that they can be dissolved by the hot fluids that are permeating through the rock. So think like dolomites or silty carbonates are really good host rocks for Carlin type deposits. Obviously, hot hydrothermal fluids, mostly crustal scale and some meteoric scale fluids that come up and that have the right chemical properties. And that's number 5, fluid chemistry, chemical properties. So sulfur-rich fluids that can really grab onto the gold and then be deposited in the host rocks. So again, very quick snapshot of Carlin deposits. I encourage you to do more research if you're interested. And then on this next slide here, I would like to give a shout out to another fellow geohugger. So Francois Robert gave an incredible geohug on Carlin type deposits in 2022. And if you want to know more, I encourage you to go and look at that recording. It's a really good one. So here's just kind of a closer look at a pit scale image of the 3 main mineralized environments for Carlin type deposits. So you have in these sort of red lines here where we have a converging network of different fault structures, you can get mineralization in there. Where you see the little triangle dashed area is where mineralization occurs in the breccias. And then finally in these deep sulfide feeders, the blue zone, you can have mineralization going up and down that way. So really lots of different environments for gold to form. And as I mentioned before, here's a couple of core samples of very high grade gold from Carlin. Maybe not that spectacular, aside from some good silicification. You wouldn't know that these samples have, 25 or 100 grams per ton gold. Okay, so moving on to our resource model. So the resource model for enterprise. This is a workflow that I prepared when I had my Atana business. And the idea is that no matter how much time you have to prepare a resource estimate, you always have to think about assigning time to every step. You can't skip steps. And so you need to think about it from the get-go. How much time do I have to spend on QA/QC, on building my wireframes? Because I know I need to save time for considering, maybe something a little bit less exciting, but like document control and handover to engineering. You need to make sure you have sufficient time for validation. So from the get-go, Guy and I, sat down and talked about how long do we think it's going to take us to prepare this model. We need to make sure we have time for rework. We need to have time to validate. We need to write our report. So then we said, okay, for the month of March this year, no fun activities other than working on the Parker Challenge on the weekends. That became our main focus, and we were driven. And I think I credit Guy for giving the final push at the end. So we got it in on time. We did a lot of reading about the geology to learn a bit more, to get familiar with what we wanted to be able to represent in our 3D model. I mentioned already looking at satellite imagery, reading papers, photos from the papers that were provided. And this image here that I'm sharing is really what we found to be the most representative, the most impactful section that showed the stratigraphy, the structural features, and some of like the shape, the morphology that the mineralization would have. So we were always keeping this in mind of how we wanted our model to look. Okay, so first step was build the geology and structural model. So we built this in Leapfrog Geo. We incorporated mapping data, drilling data, the topography that was provided. We modeled some small intrusive features, the folding and faulting, and you can see here in this lower inset. Actually, I just turn on my laser pointer. So here is where, I think we reasonably were able to represent what I showed you in the last scene regarding the risk interpretation around the geological structure. We also draped one of the satellite images onto the deepest mine surface that we were provided. And where we saw multi-scale bench failures in the pit, we interpreted those to be potential fault structures. So we sort of digitized them on, and we used them to either validate faults that we'd already identified or to potentially identify new faults that we hadn't noticed before. Here's a super important step and really fun, is just like sitting with the data and spinning and slicing and scrolling and moving, back and forth, using different color schemes, using different ratios, and really just trying to see things in the data. Convince yourself you see something, maybe disprove what you think you're seeing, and try and get a feel for the data. And we both spent a ton of time doing this, and I sort of liken it to those magic eye posters that were really popular in the late 90s, where you'd stand in front of them and blur your eyes and see if you could see the hidden picture. Leapfrog actually has a tool for this, which is called the Enhance High Values, or Jun Cowan calls it the X-ray feature. So I definitely use that in Leapfrog a lot. And eventually, hopefully something pops up, as it will do here in a second, where, it kind of falls into place and it matches the interpretation that you were looking for. Next is the domains, and this was tricky. I mean, it's a huge deposit, lots of data, not a lot of time, so we had to try and figure out a let's say a structured approach to defining the domains. So what we did is we created a ton of composite files. So we used 26 different grade bins. We used 4 different lengths of composites, and we created composite sets and calculated for each single composite what is the sort of contained metal or thickness times grade for that interval. And we plotted them up on this chart here to look for some kind of changes in behavior, some kind of relationships or breaks in there. And then once we identified those breaks, we looked at them in 3D. Does it make sense? Can we see continuity? Yes, no, go back to this chart, choose other cutoffs. And it was really like an iterative approach back and forth to finally identify what we call the optimal nested mineralized intervals. So here you can see we've chosen, for the longer composites, we've chosen the low grade cutoff at 0.2 grams gold. For the mid-grade composites, we chose a cutoff of 1 gram ton over 30-foot composites. And for the high grade, we used a 6 gram per ton cutoff, and those were composites of 15 feet. Now, here, this next piece is a bit of a stretch, but the thinking is, Guy and I both have experience in nickel mineralization, and I know that a magmatic nickel deposit is not the same as a Carlin Trend deposit. But we thought of it in terms of how can we identify from the data things that might be present in the actual physical rock or in the domains themselves that we, how can we see this? And so in magmatic nickel deposits, you have 3 main types of mineralization. So you have a low-grade disseminated sulfide, you have a mid-grade net textured, and then you have a massive sulfide, which is a much higher grade. So we kind of thought, well, perhaps this ore body in its own way has a similar sort of subdomaining within the ore body. Low-grade halo, mid-grade sort of main mass of the deposit, and then a high-grade shoot. So here we can see just a single section of those optimized nested intervals, and what first looks a little bit like a messy view of a very well-drilled section. Once we apply those shells, it kind of smooths it out, and you can see in the pink shape here, which is our high-grade core. Then in the red outline is the mid-grade, and then this outer yellower interval would be our low-grade halo. The first set of solids or wireframes were generated in Genesis. I didn't mention that before, but we went back and forth between two different software packages. So Guy uses Genesis and I work in Leapfrog. And then we were going back and forth between those tools to refine the solids. So here's just a few sections of the evolution of the wireframes. So started with something very clunky in Genesis, very just sort of very large scale solids. And then we refine the intervals, including excluding things to make it more continuous, reassigning intervals where they were in close proximity to one another, filtering out the dreaded leapfrog bubbles that we know appear, and then validating between the two of us to see that we were feeling it, things were feeling like they were holding together. Also, something that was mentioned in the documentation on Carlin type deposits that we looked for and we did identify were two shapes or two main morphologies for mineralization. So the very high grade shoots tend to occur in these cigar shaped or prolate domains. And that's the high grade shoots that are parallel to the fold axis in those large scale folds that I showed in the section. And then you have these other oblate or pancake shaped morphology of mineralization that follow more along the stratigraphy of the geology. And those were our medium and lower grade domains. Okay, so here's the stretch of a link to Mr. Tetsu Ikuzawa. So Tetsu was a Grand Prix winner. And here he is looking very swaggy in his fur-lined coat in front of his yellow Porsche 911. And I love that picture. And the link here is that this Porsche 911 came about in the early 1970s. And interestingly, only about 4 years before conditional simulation came out and was first introduced by Andre Journal. So what I'm seeing here, and you can challenge me on the robustness of my link later, but what I think is that a Porsche is still recognized today as a very robust and reliable automobile. I'm not a car person, but I think it's got a pretty solid reputation. And I would say that also conditional simulation is robust and reliable. And I think it's the best tool we have at the moment to really assign uncertainty to the resource estimates that we prepare, to allow mine planners to prepare those stochastic mine plans I spoke about earlier, and to allow our finance friends to make financial models and then investment decisions based on something that has uncertainty to attach to it. And the quote here that I've given from Clayton is, and he said this at last year's MRMR conference in Vancouver, is that I'm slightly paraphrasing, but if you estimate resources without assigning uncertainty, you are a dangerous person. And most of us do it, right? Because we don't have the tools, or because we're pressed for time, or we're not sure if we're doing it right. But really, I think there's a step to be had in the industry and improving and conveying that uncertainty that we know is there. We know the data is not perfect. We know that it's sparse. And so we need to convey that uncertainty. So again, coming back to the Porsche and conditional simulation, let's be the Porsche of the mining industry. Hopefully that satisfies it. Okay, so very quickly on EDA and top cutting. I won't spend a lot of time on this. Guy might address it a little bit more in his talk, but we did do exploratory data analysis. We did top cutting on all the domains. We did find that the domains were really well behaved after we had done all the subdomaining. And I think we ended up with sort of 8 main domains, something like 5 or 6 mid-grade domains, and 2 or 3 high-grade domains. So we kept each of those, we kept the waste domain, we made sure that the impact on the contained metal was not very significant, but it was done just as part of a good practice. So here's another quote from Harry Parker, and again, I hope this one is correct, but I read it somewhere and I love it. So Harry apparently said, "You can't kill yourself with a pogo stick." And what I think he was trying to say here is that sometimes we get too fancy for our own good, and we can sort of go down a path of confusion, and we can maybe stuff things up a little bit. So what I've shown here is just a section of a polygonal estimate, or what we call often a nearest neighbor estimate, which is super simple, right? You have a data point, you know what this number is, and you extrapolate that same number halfway to the next data point that you have. And you do that on all sides. And this volume within your polygon, the entire volume gets the same grade, right? So it's super simple. We know that's not correct. We know there's gradation in grade or all properties between these 2 points, but it feels good, right? We understand it. It's simple, and we use it as a validation tool very often. How does your nearest neighbor compare with your ID, compare with your creed, compare with your MIK? So I think, I like this concept of being simple and always coming back to the fundamental aspects of things. So in our case, what was simple was our validation. So we didn't do anything fancy here, but we did a lot of validation. So we used 10 different methods to validate. And what we did also is we didn't just say, oh, global means matches doesn't match. Here's the swath plot, thank you and goodbye. What we did is we really called out where things matched and where they didn't. So for example, in this lower image here, you can see the blast hole data overlain on the wireframes. And I'm not sure if it's very evident, but where my cursor is here between these two pink lines, we had a great match. The wireframe was really representing the blast hole data. Between these two purple lines in the area I'm pointing out now, we didn't use the blast hole data to inform the wireframes, but when we validated, we could see that the wireframes did not accurately represent the short scale data. So this is an area where we pointed out that we could do better in the future. So really just highlighting cases where it was validating well and other cases where we could improve. So now over to the results. So this came out of the AusIMM judges. So just some general information. There were 303 downloads, so quite a number of people downloaded the data set. There were just 22 final entries, so that means only 1 out of every 14 people actually submitted a final product. 3 entries were invalid, and there were 10 second round finalists. And there were actually 4 entries that were really closely contended and debated between the judges by 13 judges from Barrick, AusIMM committee, and some independent reviewers. A couple of the key observations from the judging panel. Not very many of the models were peer reviewed. There was an overall lack of information on uncertainty and risk assessment. Classification was the major distinguishing feature or the major source of variability between the different models, and that domaining was really important in order to be able to match what the Barrick team had developed. So just one more little animation, and again, this comes from Danny Kentwell, who was one of the judges, and he shared this with us. So I've picked out 2 little areas, A and B, and what we're going to see in a second when I start it is a slice, the same slice through every one of the models, and we're seeing the gold grade. So you're going to see, right, we have the scale. If it's blue, it's, almost 0, very low grade. If it starts to get up above 2, we're going into the oranges and reds. And I think what you'll see is in this area A, pretty consistently above 2 grams per ton. So all of the teams estimated those blocks around the same value. Great. In the B area, I think what you'll see is we're going from nothing, not even estimated, to super low grades, all the way up to above 3 grams per ton. So this is where there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of differences between the models. So I'll just turn it on now. I might need to get out of my laser pointer. There we go, and I'll start that animation. So keep your eyes on these 2 little boxes. and I'll stop it there. So that it goes on through the different geological domains and resource classification. But remember, each one of those slices was produced from exactly the same data set. So kind of scary. And if you're a mine planner or a mine manager, how do you know if you're getting the model that was estimated and those blocks were, giving you 0, or the blocks were giving you 3 or 4 or more grams per ton? So there's a huge amount of uncertainty in there. So last team slide here is about why we think we won. So 3 main reasons. Experience, as I mentioned, we both have quite a lot of experience in resource estimation, in creating, reviewing lots of different models and seeing things that can go wrong and seeing lots of good practice. We understood how much time it would require us to do the work. We worked well together as a team, and we were able to share the tasks based on our strengths and what our software packages could do. And we, worked well with open dialogue. We stuck to the script. We read the rules again and again. We made sure to communicate what we had done. And we were balancing a bit of innovation that Guy will show you next week with some more standard practices. I have just 2 more slides. This first one is a promo. So I'm on the organizing committee for the Canadian equivalent of the AusIMM conference. It's the MRMR conference. It'll be in Montreal in November 2026. We would love to have you all there. The website is up. We're looking for sponsors. We will be calling for presenters. We'll be calling for experienced QPs and CPs. We want short courses. So if you have any interest, reach out to me and I will definitely plug you in there. But, plan to travel to Montreal next November. Bring a light jacket. And then finally, I promised some questions to the audience. So some things for you to think about and maybe tell me what you think. Come off mute afterwards. One is, how can the challenge be redesigned to potentially be less of a burden? It's a ton of work. Maybe we would get more entries if there was a slightly smaller scoped competition. What else should we be trying to learn from this kind of collaborative competition or exercise? On the resource practitioner side, what steps can be taken to improve consistency and transparency? And what other challenges are we facing as an industry that together we can try and solve to do better? That's it for me, Jess. So I look forward to either hearing questions or having people share their thoughts on what I've shared today.
That was awesome. Thank you so much.